everyone. This video is on our phase one of the compliance management solution. And before we get started with the demonstration and training, I want to give you an overview of what our compliance management module provides. It is a three-step approach to documenting and collecting your evidence to report on compliance status. The first step is the internal control preparation and documentation of it. In the step one internal controls, what we are going to review today is A, how to document your internal controls. B, determine the applicability and implementation status of the control that you need to report on. And C, map your controls to the control library and any certifications or reporting documentation that you want to track so that your control can show up as a statistic summary for percent compliant for that report. Okay. So that's the first step of compliance management, is preparing your internal control and knowing what control you need to implement in your environment. As part of this compliance management module, there is also a step 2, which is preparing your test steps, which is what we call compliance tests. And there's also step 3, which is actually going out and collecting your test evidence so that you can document your test results. We will talk about step 2 and step 3 in another training video that you can listen to when you're ready for that. So let's talk about step 1, which is documenting your internal controls, the applicability and implementation status, and the mapping to the control library and certification reports. So first you want to log into your CyberOne environment with your credentials. And make sure that on the tab here, you're under, you're selecting compliance management among all the other items that are on this list. Make sure it's under compliance management. And then you go into your internal control tab. Here you will add your internal controls that you want to document. Now, many times, depending on what control you need to report on compliance, you may want to start with the framework. And if that is the case, you just let us know from CyberOne, and we will pre-upload your controls for you. We do have a shortcut to various different framework, and here's a sample list of them. And we're constantly adding more and collaborating with various different organizations with their content as well, that you may have the option to purchase their content pack for. Okay. And what we do in terms of the CyberOne platform is we map all of the content, and we give you access to some control library so that your internal control that you end up managing and checking for compliance can be mapped to one or many control references. Okay, so we have a shortcut of selecting some kind of control and adding that into your internal control environment. So just let us know what kind of controls you want to start with, and we will help you generate your initial list or add more control to your environment. Okay. Now, what you need to do for each control is drill down to the control and make sure that your control documentation meets your internal requirements. So what you want to document is the control frequency. Is this a key control or not? And a key control uh, is something that is the primary control, not a compensating control, right? If it's a key control, it should be communicated throughout the organization. This is an optional field. You don't have to um, fill this out. Parent control means that uh, there is a high level control that you want to check. And then if you're going with by a framework, this may not apply. Okay. What you also want to document most importantly is in your controls, is it applicable to you or not? Sometimes they're not applicable, even though you have to report on a framework like NIST cybersecurity framework or ISO control. Not everything is applicable to you, but you do want to make sure that it's documented here in your internal control tab to show your auditor that you have gone through the due diligence of reviewing every control in the framework to determine applicability. So you check here if it's applicable or not. You also want to identify the control ownership because even though it is applicable to you, you may not own it. So, for example, if you have an application that is on AWS, you do not own the AWS infrastructure for firewalls and routers and all that stuff, right? So, that may be a third party. Or maybe you have access to configure AWS and set up the firewall the way you want to get it set up. So then that is a shared control because AWS implements the firewall, but you have to configure it. So then that is shared. Okay. So you do want to document if this control it has to be implemented internally through you in the organization, or is it completely owned by a third party, such as you're outsourcing your SOC or you're outsourcing your janitorial services to someone else, or if this is a shared control that you both have to have responsibility for. Okay. Next, you want to talk about the origination. If you have this information, this is good to know. This is mostly for um, services and shared type of cloud environment. It's useful for people who have to do FedRAMP compliant. And if you're not one of those, this may not be applicable to you, so you can skip this field. We also have implementation status of this control. So you initially, as you go through all the controls that you have to document and track and test, you want to know if it's implemented or not yet. If it's not fully implemented, you may not be ready for testing because testing takes a lot of effort and people involved. So you want to make sure you start testing when it's implemented. If not, then you can create a report on everything that's not implemented or partially implemented and address those controls with management. You may want to document what your solution and implementation plans are for this control. And this is also where you can include your notes. If you're tracking this control for whatever reason, whatever updates you have, you can include that here. There's also on the bottom here, there is a section called Notes and Attachment. This will allow you to add additional notes. Grouped by the date that you add them and maybe contribution from different people that adds those note here. If you add notes here, you'll be able to see who add the notes and when the notes were added, as well as upload any attachments. Okay. We strongly recommend that all files are uploaded under the file section. Currently, as the Salesforce platform becomes more mature, they're in the process of divorcing notes and attachment. So it's a good best practice to add all files under the Files section. Um, right now, when you add files, you'll have a pointer to that file in this Note and Attachment section as well. So you'll see some duplicates here, but don't worry, the file is only encrypted and stored in one place. They're just pointer links. Okay. So once you identify your controls, you can add additional guidance from maybe your advisors, like the Big Four, any consulting companies or legal firms that may want to give you some guidance. And under related reference, they can put their contact information here so you can contact them. Or you can reference citations of sources as well if you have any kind of guidance. Okay. Typically, the framework will require you to think about this control and what risk it is mitigating. So this is where you want to add your risk and map it to something that is a risk that you're tracking in your risk register. So all you have to do is look up the risk. And if it's not a risk that is already in here, it's a new risk, then you want to address that from a risk management perspective, and you can watch another video on how to add risk into the risk register so that you can map it here. The control library mapping is done in the control library side, so you don't have to do anything here in the internal control. The mapping is something that CyberOne is putting a lot of effort in doing, and so hopefully we can help you dynamically update these sections as you identify your risk. We can help map it to all the different frameworks, or this is something in discussion that you can have with CyberOne so that we can put these mapping in your environment. Certifications are, think of it as reports that you can track internally. And if there's any report that you want to set up, you can list those reports here and map it to this control if it applies to that report, so that as your control status gets updated for compliance, we can calculate the percent compliant for that certification report. So that's all about documenting your internal control. Come back and look at our step 2 in terms of documenting the compliance test for your control.